Broadcast. Welcome to Friday's edition, Friday, May 10th edition of the Zaner Marketcast, your one and only spot to keep up with all the agricultural market news. I am Zaner Ag Hedge Joe. This is
Dan Hussey, a senior market strategist over here as well.
Welcome to the post-WASDE pre-Mother's Day episode of the Zaner Marketcast Friday afternoon. Don't say that we didn't tell you. If you're watching this on Friday, you can get to moving. If you're watching it on Saturday night and you forgot, you better get to moving because tomorrow, Saturday, May 11th, is Mother's Day. I'd like to send a quick shout out to my mom who dragged us all off the golf course, out of the field, out of the workshop, out from underneath the hood of the car, off the basketball courts to make sure that we got to school and everywhere else we were supposed to get clean and in fresh clothes. Thank you, Mom.
Yeah, special shout out to my wife, mother of our beautiful 2-year-old, with another one on the way in September, and of course my mom too. You're great, angel to raise 5 kids. I don't know how they're doing that, and I've got one with another one on the way. I hear once I get outnumbered, that's where things get really fun. But 3 more, you got a basketball team. Yeah, and I don't know if I'll play with that law of averages and try to get there, but we will keep our head down and nose to the grindstone to see what we can do.
You can do it. Take some creatine.
Sure.
Market recap. Let's talk about what has happened this week, where we've been and where we got to. Of course, today was WASDE. Corn opened 459. The high was 472. Last trade 454 and a quarter. Last trade I saw, low was 454 and a quarter. Last trade I saw was 468 and a half. The change on the week was up 8 3/4. Might be helpful to note that coming into the day, we look at some of the stuff ADM does. They had estimates of the funds in corn being still short 207,000 contracts.
Yeah, that's still pretty darn short and
pretty sizable for this time of the year.
We'll see. To note there, we did make a double bottom on the week there for corn as well. For I believe it was the July contract. The week over week was a little bit of a higher low for the December. But to your point about the fund short, we will see here today in the commitment of traders how short they still are. That reading being taken that will get released today at 3 p.m., taken every Tuesday, and we were basically at the highs of the week until today on Tuesday. So being at that extreme in price that we've been at since basically January is going to give us, and certainly since we made the lows, on the chart for the year, that's going to give us a really good idea of how short this market still is, the fund category, and how much of their short covering rally potential energy they still have. Because if it's their position that's getting bought back and driving the market price higher, well, once that diminishes enough, they won't have any contracts to buy back. And, the uptick in corn and wheat and beans may be spent.
Interesting to note, this July high, 472, and our close, 468 and a half. I don't have the Dees numbers down. You'll have to check on your own charts at home. But new highs for the week today.
We definitely made a new high of the month for December
big
corn
deal.
as well.
Definitely a big deal. Speaks to what's going to happen here in the future. Beans opened 12.14 3/4. High was 12.56 and a half. Low 12.04 and a half. Last trade I saw was 12.18 3/4. Up 3 3/4 on the week. As we mentioned, maybe that's a little bit like going around the block. If you look at your charts at home, July beans going around the block to get to the house next door. Opened at 14 3/4, 18 3/4. Last trade. Funds still short 130,000 contracts. What are they going to do this time of the year? As we mentioned, so big questions there. Next couple sessions, 2-3 sessions, probably very key in beans. Wheat, we opened at 622. High was 665 and a quarter. Low 609 and a half. Last trade I saw 661 3/4. That's a change of up 39 and a quarter on the week. Funds, as of this morning or coming into the day, estimated short 36,000 contracts.
Second week in a row where wheat surprises a little bit. It doesn't feel like you're up over 30 cents, but you are.
Quietly carving into that overhead, what is almost like a technical vacuum overhead, where we have been down for so long for this market to chop so aggressively into this overhead air.
Absolutely.
Is very notable.
And there's something to be said, too, if you look at some of the longer-term trend indicators, like the 200-day moving average, for example. Wheat really came up in a hurry to get back to that level, has now actually gone above it and has tested it as support, and today, has been flagging above it and some so to speak. That's something we haven't seen in corn and beans just yet. We got close there in the new crop contract for corn, I know, to the 200-day, but not quite. Makes me wonder here now in this next push up, if we get, another high for the month, if there isn't a similar type, vacuum situation to very visible levels like that in these markets as well.
They seem to be covering those shorts. Soy meal, we opened 372.20. The high was 390 even, low 365.60, closed 372. I think we were up, 372.50 last trade. I think we were up just marginally. What is that, 30 cents? Funds long 54,000 contracts in meal. And meal has kind of been a bit of a driver.
Yeah.
In
the meal deal, as Ted would say.
Meal deal, right? Yeah. Bean oil opened 43.08, high was 44.78, low 42.53.
That seems like a big range. And certainly on the day, I know it was.
What?
The oil.
Yeah, bean oil. Yeah, we're moving today. 43.08 open for the week, high 44.78, low 42.53. Last trade 44.31. Wow. That was up 123. Funds there still short 67,000 contracts. Now oil, big move today because there's rumors that contaminated used cooking oil, right? That's
correct?
That's the rumors.
That was from effectively from China and turning the heads of regulators. And what could be, this is all unsubstantiated yet, but could be precursors to us imposing tariffs on such importing of bean oil
on Tuesday. Maybe,
right?
I thought I saw. Again,
that's right
from Reuters.
And we'll see that come to fruition or not. But if that's true, and we're about to slap tariffs on importing of bean oil from China, or most comes from some Asian country to begin with, or any veg oil. Usually, and unfortunately, there's a response to that type of action in the past. And, I don't want to say the trade war lingo has begun, but this is saber rattling that could result in that exact type of, result.
So for me, with today's WASDE, I was 100% sure coming into the day that you're going to get your 52 bean yield number, your 180, let's just call it, 181. I was thinking. And in my mind, there was no way we could be surprised by anything. And that was just cut and dry. And we almost didn't even need to show up. And sure enough, market proves me wrong.
It was you and the rest of the trade. It wasn't, right? Those numbers weren't just, they were, of course, your personal assessment, right? And mine too. But that was generally where the trade thought things were, right? So if that's the goalpost that we're using to say if today's report was bullish or bearish, I would say that this was a little bit more of a friendly report today.
Shows to go you that you got to show up every time. Just because when you think you got it licked, they're gonna throw a curveball. Today, what would you say the curveball was?
So one of the curveballs today, I think, was when you get really down to it, was more of a corn-driven WASDE report. That's where I think things were the friendliest. A 90 million acre area planted for new crop corn. This again was the first time we got to look at the USDA's assessment and new crop yield and acreage predictions. We are all looking for them to say something about South American production as well. I feel that was a little bit more baked into the cake because the USDA attaché down in Brazil had already given us their figures, and the trade was assuming that that's where it was going to go.
No resolution to those numbers. USDA came down a bit, but certainly nowhere near like CONAB or some of these other individual market watchers down on the ground.
Just to touch on those, because I want to focus a little bit more here quickly on go more into our U.S. numbers, because that's where we're setting this is with a starter pistol, right, for the USDA's continual assessment of these for the rest of the crop year. But the Brazilian, I believe it was the Brazilian production number coming in at 169. That was a little bit lower than I think what the 170 to 171 million metric ton area that they were expecting for corn. So, okay. A little bit
25 crop.
Correct. And 20, that's new crop, right? That is not not this last year. So, okay, shaving probably some reduced acreage or yield off of that. I forget exactly what they said. I'm sure it's a mixture of those words to bring that down a little bit. But the big area and shining point here for the corn balance sheet, old crop ending stocks came in 100 million bushels lower. And that was off of some higher usage numbers in the export and ethanol usage. That's nice to have that built in, but we know that those numbers could be pencil pushed later in the year. And new crop came in 180 million bushels below expectations in ending stocks as well. So seeing those two numbers, and of course, when old stocks are shifted, your carryover and your starting production, or excuse me, your carryover number for the next year is a little bit lower as well. But seeing as the first yield assessment and acreage assessment we got out of the USDA came in at 90 million acres planted for 2024 corn and 181 yield, that was on the low end of my personal assessment for acreage. And okay, that's basically trendline yield, so that number is more or less a push to me. But shifting those numbers around, if this is probably the lower end of acreage for the year, and that's barring continued rain over the next several weeks, right, that truly results in a true late plant, which we don't really have a situation for this year. Last year we were planting corn, we were full steam ahead into June 1st, right? But if we don't get a late plant situation, I think that 90 million acres number is on the lower end. I was between 90 to 94 for kind of the barometer of what I'm looking at. And I was scaling between 178 to 183 on the yield number. This puts us kind of towards the low end for production into the closer to, it's really hard to get these production numbers below 16 billion bushels, and coming in at, 16, at a total of 1609 on the total supply, but production numbers around 16.2 billion bushels for corn, leaves a lot of room to the upside for that production number to go higher. If we add in a million acres here and even reduce yields by 2 bushels an acre, you're still gaining on the production number and your ending stock. Ending stocks for corn for 24-25 came in at 2.1 billion bushels. Again, that was a little bit lower, 180 million below expectations. So I think that was the big driving factor here for corn and the corn balance sheet, and certainly what we saw in the charts today.
With demand driving those changes in carryout.
Correct.
That sort of tells me that we're also going to have to show up and find out that maybe the narrative that this growing season, even with the late plant start, the growing season is already, we could just pencil it in, it's concluded.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the case. That maybe we're a little tighter than anybody had anticipated.
Absolutely. And let's not get it wrong here. We're trying to be optimistic, but also being realistic, right? We're planning for the worst, but are hoping for the best and planning for the worst, right? We'd love to see these numbers be lower, prices rally substantially, but being a realist and looking at where the USDA is starting things off, there's a potential record crop still on the table.
It doesn't necessarily make for polite conversation, but if we look at the chart, the corn chart, and if you look at your or July corn chart at home, we were saying earlier today, if we didn't know that was corn, we would say, there's your, fuel up your rocket ship. That chart looks really great.
Yes.
And so it's hard to reconcile the numbers that we are talking about here with what I'm seeing on the chart. Something's going to have to give here.
In 2024, 25, these numbers are a year and a half away, right? So there's so many things that can change between now.
To be done.
There is growing to be done. There's sunlight to be had or not, and rain and forecasts or not, that will shift all of this around. I mean, heck, China could come in and decide to buy a lot or decide to buy none at all, right? And that can change things.
How about wheat?
So, wheat domestic numbers here coming in on all area planted on wheat, 47.5 million acres planted. That's lower than last year, but higher than the year before. And I point that out because wheat's at an interesting point that this is the lowest price we've had for wheat in 3 years for plantings. Yield per area, the average yield per harvested acre at 48.9. That brings the production number in at 1.85 billion bushels for all wheat, with the beginning stocks of 688 million bushels. Leaves us, with an ending stocks number at the end of the year after usage totals from the USDA of 1.899 billion, of still 766 million bushels carried over. That's the biggest carryover number we've had in 3 years, an ending stock number we've had in a few years, coupled with the lowest price of wheat over the same period. So while you appreciate seeing a slightly higher export number here than what was originally anticipated, and certainly increasing that export number year over year by about 55 million, we have to compare that price of wheat to internationally to see if that demand's really going to be there, rather than relying on, wheat prices are cheap, but are they cheap compared to other people's wheat is the $1 million question.
Market seems to be taking the threat of inclement weather in Russia
We were up before the
seems
report,
to be taking it rather seriously.
right? If I was to gather what, why we were higher and made a new high overnight, it would have been on the reports of, Black Sea and wheat being under threat, production under threat, right? I know that there's a lot of people that will tell you, well, they're going to replan and government financing will come in.
Can't kill wheat.
Right, all the things, right? But okay, a weather market's a weather market,
And
right?
here again, the chart is showing
absolutely.
Chart is kind of pointing toward the fact that the market at least is taking it seriously.
Yeah, certainly.
For sure. News? Or do we, well, how about WASDE? Anything else? Anything left to add?
Just real quick on the beans, 86.5 million acres planted and projected here for soybeans. That's, just like corn, it's right in the middle of the last couple of years. The 52 bushels an acre yield there. Again, too soon to call either one of those or say there's a late plant for soybeans at all at this point because it's still, May 10th. The beginning stock number coming in at 340 million bushels. That is going to be 60 to 70 million bushels bigger than our prior, beginning and starting stocks. Total usage coming in at 4.3 billion bushels. Again, kind of in line with a couple years ago, but that is 250 million bushels bigger than last year's total usage. And a lot of that being driven by 125 million added to exports and your typical 125 million added to crush demand there as well. So, okay, crush demand that's the curve, the crush curve, right? And it's pretty static, but that export demand is, I'm worried if that 125 million comes out of there and it's not there. Well, now the ending stock number they're telling us at 445 million bushels just became 570 million bushels. And that is, basically doubling the ending stocks number we had from 2023. And it's, 75% bigger than last year's ending stock number. I think there's a reason why in today's price action, soybeans were not the impressive, chart to look at, when it was more of a wheat and corn day.
Hard to find a bullish story in those numbers.
It really is.
Where with corn and wheat, you could say, here's what we got going on. But in beans, those numbers are a bit, those are numbers that are a bit burdensome.
Absolutely. It's a lot harder, right, at 52 yields, yields in the 50s to just, to lose or gain based off of yield gains and reductions in the beans than they are for corn that yields 4 times that in terms of bushels.
And there again, a lot of growing
3 to
be
4.
done.
Absolutely.
How about some news stories?
Yeah. Let's see here. Well, we've got a couple here.
3 Russian grain regions declare emergency over cold weather / frost damage by Olga Popova from Reuters. 3 of Russia's key grain growing areas declared a state of emergency on Wednesday, citing May frosts that have caused severe damage to crops and will reduce this year's harvest. The frosts that hit in early May led to catastrophic consequences. Igor Artemonov, the governor of the Lipetsk region, said on the Telegram messaging app before signing the emergency decree, "We must understand that this year's harvest will be much smaller than the previous one." In neighboring Voronezh, I should have read these. We maybe should have did a little tutorial on speaking Russian.
I don't know any, right. I don't know any rules of law here that say we have to nail these names on a first time.
We'll fix it in the edit. The Regional Agricultural Ministry, according to preliminary data, the area of dead or severely damaged crops has exceeded 265,000 hectares. Russia is one of the world's top grain producers and exporters. We knew that. It said declaring a state of emergency would enable farmers to document the objective impossibility of achieving target indicators, which they are obliged to hit in order to receive subsidies and also to apply for insurance payments. Yikes. Analysts have already reduced their forecast for the 2024 grain harvest because of the dry weather in the south, but the impact of the frosts has not yet been included in forecasts.
And there's definitely, right, a weather market to be had for wheat right now.
For sure.
And certainly the markets were responding to it. We'll see if we'll see the extent of that damage too. But there's of course continued talks of exports out of that region that can come in and fluctuate, and we'll see more, right, as price action and time develops.
For sure.
Floods in southern Brazil have now, particularly in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, it's being inundated by the worst flooding here in 80 years. 100 people have already lost their lives and rendering thousands homeless. Rains are expected to persist over the weekend, and by noon on May 8th, the state authority said 372 people have been injured and 128 were unaccounted for. Our thoughts and prayers. I know it's a cheap thing to say, but truly, out there for the people who are being affected by this disaster and natural disaster right now.
Forget about the humanity.
Exactly. You can't forget about the cost that real people here and lives are at stake. More than 1.5 million people were affected by these floods, which was spread to 417 of the state's 497 cities. So, I mean, there's just so many people affected. It's amazing when you look at the rainfall maps, and even into Paraguay too. Brazil's National Center for Natural Disasters warns that the southern area of Rio Grande do Sul state is under high risk for more flooding, with rainfall expected to restart after a brief hiatus. The weather forecasters are saying in a statement that they could face many more floods of serious proportions. In other words, it's not over, unfortunately. And to some effect, this is probably another weather story that is going to be continuing to hamper exports out of that region and production that you'd otherwise would assume this time of the year would be at full swing. And over the next couple months, does that mean that there's more a turn to other areas of the world? But generally speaking, this is a humanitarian crisis that we hope resolves itself as soon as possible.
God bless those folks.
Seriously. Now, another announcement here out of the EPA, the FDA, and the USDA all announced a coordinated framework. Get ready for this, folks, for regulation into biotechnology. Following the executive order of President Biden in 2022, under this framework, the agencies look to spell out regulations for gene-edited plants to ensure the regulatory approach are risk proportionate. I think some of that is in response to maybe the pushbacks from China and Mexico and GMO crops. But the EPA, USDA have also taken it a step further for crops that are incorporated with plant-incorporated protectants. So these are PIPs. I'm not entirely sure. I'm no biochemist, but it sounds like that there's another level of gene editing here that they're looking into.
Play one on TV.
Both agencies laid out several plans for clarification of what PIPs are. Well, that's good because none of us know, including a recent EPA rule that exempts some of those products from regulation. Well, that'll be interesting to see. However, I think the story here of where it really changes and the rubber hits the road is that we are now seeing how this is going to affect ingredients and food crops. But the agency is also looking into food safety and companies developing engineered crops that are directed directly at the regulation of cell-cultured foods. The FDA, and that's fancy speak for lab-grown meat, everybody. FDA is overseeing consultations with companies about the food safety issues before they go to market, as well as how companies organize necessary scientific reporting back to the arguments that their food is safe. USDA is expected to propose new regulation for labeling meat and poultry products that contains cultured cells from animals, otherwise would be subject to the FDA, Food Safety and Inspection Services oversight. So they're just trying to basically give us a framework for lab-grown meat and other genetically modified products. I know our listeners probably have a lot to say about this topic as it directly competes with, I think, some of our clients in the cattle, hog, and poultry industry.
I too am sitting here trying to decide the odds. I think it's very possible, and now things can change. A lot. It's very difficult to predict the future, but for me personally, I think you have better odds of me singing karaoke, which are zero.
Yeah. As we learned last week.
Yeah. For new listeners, zero. You have better odds of me singing karaoke than you do of me eating lab-grown meat.
Yeah.
At this stage, maybe something changes in the future. But I think when I think about meat, I think about going down the road to Heather's family farm, and then they have meat, and I purchase it, and then I go home and I eat it. And the lab is out in the
Why can't we
field.
Just grow meat?
It's a laboratory in a field, and my meat is also plant-based in that the animals eat plants. And so I don't see anything wrong with that formula. I'm obviously joking, right? I'm obviously making light, but this makes very little sense to me. I'm trying to get my mind around it, and it's making me more confused.
Joe enjoys plant-based, free-range lab.
Right, just outside the laboratory. I don't understand that. I guess we gotta.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I appreciate frameworks on regulation in what is otherwise sounds like a scientific dystopia. So, okay,
it just doesn't make, I think, and I get confused about a lot. We know, right? There's not going to be any issue with the milk because of the avian flu. Boom, milk rallies. Today I come in thinking I know what the WASDE is going to do. Boom, corn rallies. And so maybe I'm going to sit down to eat a lab-grown hamburger in the near future, but I got a feeling that's not the case.
I would probably bet that's the case. Let's check out our fun question of the week.
Fun question of the week.
From our producer, Carter.
What if it's not fun? What do we do then? Are there penalties? Are there regulations?
He's within arms.
Yeah, we'd get him. By the time anybody got here to save him, it would be too late, right? If you could only eat one cuisine for the rest of your life, i.e. Italian, Mexican, etc., what would it be? Hold one moment. Shout out the answer. Shout out an answer. You are on camera. Chinese. All right, very good. Very good.
I'm going Mexican. I mean, I know the cheap answer is sometimes Italian or like a pizza because you can put anything on it, right? Except for pineapple. That's illegal. But I'm going with Mexican food. I could eat tacos every day of my life. I love tacos.
Tacos?
Just
Chinese tacos?
Just Mexican. Any Mexican food, really. I love Mexican food.
We almost have kind of a trade agreement between Carter and the Chinese and Dan and our Mexicans south of the border. You both fine choices. Fine choices. I don't think I have anything to beat that. This is kind of a challenging question for me, as most of these are very challenging, because I really only eat meat and cookies, and so whatever, red meat and cookies, whatever.
So long as they're not lab grown.
Yeah, well, the cookies could be. I don't know why lab grown cookies don't seem to bother me one bit, but lab grown meat, I'm not signing up for that. But yeah, meat. So I think, and where does pizza come from? Italy claims it, but it was like made in. I think pizza comes from Chicago, like originally, and then the Italians stole it and took it back to Italy.
I think you're about to start a World War III with New York right now.
I'm pretty sure that that pizza started on the south side of Chicago. And so that's my cuisine would be Chicagoan, would be pizza.
Well, thank you for listening to us today and joining us for the Zaner Market Cast. If you need more, just because you can't get enough of us, follow us on Facebook, Zaner Egg Hedge on Twitter, X, and LinkedIn as the Zaner Group. If you have not already, check out our daily Egg Hedge hotline. The information is available in the content section or comment section, information section of this. Check it out. Yeah, Ted's updating that.
Price is right. It's totally free.
You've seen them on RFTV and Market to Market. The best part is it's free, as Ted said, or Joe said here. You can find the sign-up links that we provided. Thank you again, and be sure to comment and follow us and leave any questions you might have for us below if you don't want to miss a beat, and we'll be back with you as price action develops.